Kelly's Eye, brought to you by Ellis Brown Architects.
Peter, what's Kelly's Eye looking at today in the semi-darkness?
Today, David, it's almost looking like the entrance to the Tenko camp, I think, that television programme of Japanese prison camp for ladies. We've got in front of us these high gates and all sorts of bolts and things. There's a bit of barbed wire over there. There's a high fence running all the way around with danger, do not climb on fence. But in fact, it's a building site, and we're peering through the gaps. Fortunately, where this gate is, because of the pins and gudgeons, or hinges to most people, we can see straight through, and we can see a big hole with a crane in it.
A very big crane.
Yeah, and a big hole too. Not as deep as I thought it was going to be. Reminds me of that tale of a hole opened up on Loch Promenade and the Borough Surveyor is currently looking into it. You know?
Yeah.
Yes, because what we're looking at, I'm sure in a few months' time and in a year's time will be totally different, because this is the site at the end of Greenfield Road. I think this bit's Greenfield Road, where the new water treatment plant is going to cover Douglas, Onken, the east of the island.
Well, we've been to sites before looking at buildings that had once been there. In other words, there were empty sites and there was a history. Here we are, looking at a site where the building hasn't arrived.
Well, it hasn't arrived. There used to be buildings here, because the children's home, of course, which was just down, in fact, this path to our right, was requisitioned during the war and was used by the Navy as the hospital for what was Cunningham's holiday camp, which became HMS St George. And up behind there were a number of Nissen Hut buildings, which later on the Douglas Corporation Water Department took over. And this was their depot, and then just to our left, in fact, is one of these semi-submersed reservoirs, which is very handy, of course. I think that's where the water goes once it's been purified, so it's going to be a lot easier. But here we are just in October 2005, and we've just missed it, but in September was the centenary, and I don't think they celebrated it, of the Baldwin Reservoir opening.
100 years ago.
100 years ago, and just think of the foresight. This wasn't government, this wasn't some great big scheme, this was Douglas Corporation, and they actually did it by direct labour. There was no contractor coming in. They got prices from contractors, and far too much. We'll do it ourselves.
When you say labour, of course, it was very much labour in those days too, because there were fewer of the machines and cranes and so on that we have today.
Yeah, that's true. We brought in the Irish navvies, about 250 of them at one time, and they were living in huts out there on the site.
Yeah.
And of course there was the railway.
That's right, right through Baldwin Valley.
Through Baldwin, through Abbeylands and up to Onken.
Yes.
Because from Onken, of course, they brought clay and they brought stone from the Hilbury Quarry, which is no longer there. And the forerunner of this, of course, was the Douglas Waterworks Company. And their first reservoir was in Onken, in Summerhill Glen, as it is now.
Yes.
Of course, that's now in Douglas. Then their second one was at Ballacane, which was at the top of Little Mill. Then Clips, then Kerridoo, and then eventually they decided they needed a much, much bigger reservoir, so they went out to Baldwin.
Yes, and that's served pretty well for 100 years, hasn't it, apart from Sulby being added?
Sulby's been added, and they sort of pumped from Sulby over. I think Baldwin, or out at Ingerbreck, contains, or was planned to contain, 300 million gallons of water. Hard to imagine, really.
That's a lot of water, and this is going to treat some of that water, I'm sure, when it gets here. But presumably we'll come back. What are you going to see when we get back here? Have you had a look at the plans?
Yes, a long time. We're going to see a big building.
Yes.
A big building. But between now and then, I think an awful lot of water is going to go under the bridge.
The former building, of course, is not so far from here. It's just down Greenfield Road a little way, isn't it?
It is. That was opened in the 1930s. So in
still
fact,
working, isn't it?
Still working. And the thing is, from 1900 to 1934, or whenever it was, the water wasn't treated. So it came through your tap, but it was, it had just been held in a big ditch, so to speak, out in Baldwin. And then in 34 they started to add things to it and take things away and whatever and treat it. And of course, what we're being told, and I'm sure it's quite true, apart from the fact that the plant is getting tired, is that the volume of water we're using now, the plant can't cope. Now, whether that means they're going to have to build another holding tank, because at the end of the day, it's still coming from the same place after it's treated. I mean, Birch Hill and what have you, it all goes up to Hilbury, and there's a tank there, and there are other tanks scattered around the island where we're feeding from. You're not feeding direct from the filtration plant.
Many of the most iconic buildings around the island have been designed by Ellis Brown Architects. Keep up with Ellis Brown today on Facebook or via ellisbrown.im.